All right. So let's jump into things here. So, hey, welcome to the Leveraging Your Personal Strengths as a Leader workshop or webinar. Really looking forward to having you here today. Thank you for taking time out of your morning to join me. Give you a little bit of background on Intuitive Performance. If you haven't gotten a chance to know us just yet, we really like to focus on what we call whole person performance. And this starts from this idea that, if you're looking to elevate team performance, it really starts with understanding your people. And so when we look at whole person performance, it's really kind of built up this idea that leaders thrive when their organizations face a little bit less on the person in the role, but more on the people behind the job. And so for us, what we look at doing is really becoming your people development partner that helps strengthen communication, builds connectivity, and helps foster emotionally intelligent humans. And the way that we do that is through two different pillars. We offer workplace training on topics like emotional intelligence, communication, looking at leveraging your strengths as a leader. And on the other pillar, we offer that individual coaching or team experience that helps support management and leadership growth. So a little bit of background on myself. If we haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, my name is Scott Rust. I'm a ACC coach, certified coach with the International Coaching Federation. Over the past 5 years or so, I've facilitated and trained over 1,000 professionals. And I'm also the co-founder and COO at Intuitive Performance. In my free time, if I'm not working with the team or providing webinars or workshops like this, you'll likely see me out on my bike, at least during the summer months. I have it, otherwise it's packed in at home. And if you hear anything in the background, you might notice our newborn Mila might be making her presence known, just saying a quick hello. So if you hear any crying in the background, that's probably her just tuning in there as part of the webinar experience. Otherwise, I'd like to jump into a little bit to identify what are we looking to take away for today. So we're going to look at a few different things. So one key takeaway that we're looking for you to have is recognizing how to harness your unique leadership strengths to build trust, engagement, and loyalty with your team. We're also going to look at how you can improve communication and problem solving by understanding and leveraging your strengths effectively. We're going to look at how you can propel your team forward towards goals efficiently and helping enhance organizational success. And finally, looking to overcome any kind of self-reflection hurdles and maintain a balance between your strengths and areas of improvement for sustained growth. So again, we've got a few other people that are jumping in here. Really looking forward to having you with us. Thank you for joining. A few housekeeping items here just to get through. If you do have a question or anything else, we do have the Q&A enabled just on the bottom right-hand side. You can click on Q&A or you can ask a question and it'll get put there. So if I don't get to it right away, I'll make sure to kind of come back towards the end of the presentation and leave some time for that. Otherwise, feel free to either use the emojis or I don't know if there's a raise your hand function. As I mentioned, this is the first time we're using Get Response. We're going to test it out as a way of hosting our webinars. And we even love your input from a participant perspective as to how it works out for you. Next thing is, let's use the chat function. The whole purpose here today is let's make this as interactive as possible. What I've noticed is, you don't really want me standing here for the next hour and just speaking to you. I want to hear from your experience. I want us to be able to connect and talk. So let's look at using the chat function as much as possible there. And what I can do is if there's people that actually want to come off mute, I can allow you to come off mute and you can share a little bit from your own experience what's going on there. Third piece here, if we are in a group discussion, I encourage you to share from your experience rather than provide advice. What that allows people to learn a little bit from how you manage something, and then they get to take away what they feel works best for them. And so it creates a little more of a safer and collaborative environment from that perspective. And the last thing, yes, you do have to step away. No problem at all. Just drop a quick note in the chat. I understand these things happen, but looking forward to kind of jumping in on things. I'd like us to think a little bit around, before kicking things off today, really thinking about what are your key strengths. So I'd like us all to take a moment to reflect a little bit around, what are some of your key strengths? And why don't we type them in the chat? And I'd like to hear a little bit from you. So once we identify these key strengths, it'll help us, as we go through this presentation, better understand how you might be able to build on these. So if you're having issues or you're struggling to find out like, well, how do I identify my key strengths? Try to think about a little bit like, what do I do well? What are my successes? What is it that I contribute to a team? And so I encourage you to take a moment to type them in the chat here. And then we'll actually refer back to these at the end of the presentation to see how much do they line up based on our conversation and based on how we move things along here. So I'll give everyone a minute here just to be able to type in the chat. All right, we have Tanisha says a key strength is an individualistic approach, empathy, and listening skills. Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts on what maybe some of their key strengths may be? Michelle typing as well. And just so you're all aware, I did make it possible that you can come off mute. So where, again, we're looking to make this as interactive as possible. Feel free to jump in. We're a little bit of a smaller group here, only about 10 people. And so if you do want to jump in, share a little bit from your experience, I encourage you to be able to turn on your mic and share from there. So Michelle says some of her key strengths include coaching and mentoring, project management, and event planning and management. Okay. And Michelle Long says problem solving, encouraging, empathy, I'm having trouble with that word for some reason. Operationalizing and people development. Fantastic. Okay, and so I encourage you as we continue to go, type in your key strengths in the chat. And the reason I'm saying this is that I want you to keep these in mind as we go through the presentation as to, okay, how can I continue to build these strengths? Or what impact would it have if I was able to get just a little bit better at this within my role? Or even how does this align with my career as I look to continue to grow? And so looking at the next slide here, we're going to look at understanding strengths and weaknesses. So we know how important it is, to leverage your strengths, but it's also quite critical to understand some of your weaknesses. So self-awareness is the key here that will both allow you to leverage your strengths and also be able to lean on others who might be strong in areas that you might not be as strong in. And so we're going to take a look at what is the impact of leveraging your strengths, how it can benefit your career, an example of why you should be aware of your weaknesses. And in the meantime here, Tiffany has written some of her key strengths are building cross-functional relationships, coaching and development, and having an empathetic approach. Thank you, Tiffany. Okay, does anyone recognize this guy? I think we can all agree that Bill Gates, co-founder of Microsoft, is widely regarded as one of the most successful and influential figures in the tech industry and global business. But how did Gates leverage his strength to reach this level of success? So we're going to look at a few different points on how he might be leveraging his strengths, and I'd like you to think about how these might be applicable to you. And so looking at how to develop your strengths, first thing that comes up here is could be potentially through practice and repetition. If we're looking at Bill Gates, he had an early passion and aptitude for computer programming. He started at a young age and became very proficient in computer languages quickly. And a lot of that came through practice and repetition, just experimenting, trying, and continuing to move forward on things. So building your strengths, looking at how can you practice and repeat to help develop that strength. Next thing that comes up is maybe this is a natural talent or ability you have. Looking at Bill once again, entrepreneurial vision. So he possessed a really keen entrepreneurial spirit and a vision for the future of personal computing. So he saw the potential for software and how it can revolutionize the industry. And let's be honest, our whole lives, right? And so some might say, being a visionary was a natural talent or ability of his. Next piece here is looking at education and training. I mean, we all went through some form of education growing up, likely even to get some of your certifications in people and culture. And so, an example of this for Gates, he had a very technical background, but he really developed his business acumen. He had a hunger for knowledge that allowed him to understand market dynamics, licensing, distribution. So as an avid reader, he used education and training as a way to help grow this strength of his. Lastly, we have life experiences. So looking at an example here again, leadership and strategic thinking. Gates was a really highly effective leader, known for his strategic thinking and his ability to guide the company forward. And so you can imagine that a lot of his life experiences, even just throughout the business, help shape his critical decision making that help guide Microsoft's direction. So I use this example to really help illustrate how self-awareness and the effective use of your strengths can actually lead to career success and have a lasting impact on your role and the organization you're working with. So, this kind of serves a bit of as a story of inspiration if you're looking to leverage your unique strength to achieve professional goals. But just as importantly as leveraging your strengths is understanding your weaknesses. Now, when we're looking at our weaknesses, Sheryl Sandberg is someone who talks very openly about this. She is a past COO at Facebook, and she was known for talking about, the importance of self-awareness. She spoke about, grappling with imposter syndrome. She spoke about, the importance of understanding her weaknesses and acknowledging that, understanding your weaknesses is part of an improvement path of how you can move forward for both professional and personal growth. And so I have a few things here that we'll take a look at from Sheryl on how understanding her weaknesses actually turned that into a strength for her. So one of the ways that she did this was empowering her team, encouraging innovation. And again, think about these in a way of how might this be applicable in your role, especially when you're working in a people and culture department. You have a really big impact, not just on yourself, but also in the organization as a whole, the culture, how people communicate and act and everything else. And so how Sheryl did this was, encouraging team members to take ownership of projects and initiatives, leveraging their individual strengths. So the importance of not only have that self-awareness, but the awareness of others and their strengths to help contribute to group success. So she valued this idea of having diverse perspectives and encouraged open communication, collaboration, and innovation. Another way this showed up was through building strong relationships, emphasizing the importance of building those strong relationships with colleagues and team members, and recognizing that understanding each of their strengths, that she would be able to better allocate tasks and responsibilities effectively. This feeds again into a delegation piece, being able to delegate those pieces to people that have strengths in those areas. Mentorship and mentoring. So Sandberg was a strong advocate for mentorship. She believed that effective mentorship involved, leveraging your strengths and experiences, and both of not just the mentor, but also the mentee. I'm curious, even just typing in the chat here, have you ever had an experience where you were in a mentee relationship or even a mentor relationship, as I say, and you actually learned a little bit from the person you were mentoring? Maybe they provided a new outlook on things or helped you think about things a little bit differently. Type in the chat yes if you've ever experienced that. Otherwise, other things that came up for were around active listening, actively listening to your colleagues, valuing their input, and understanding their perspectives and strengths. We have both Michelle Long, Michelle Mearsman, both saying yes, absolutely. Tanisha, yes. Okay, great. That's fantastic. Lastly here, support and recognition. So Sandberg is supportive of their team and their efforts, recognizing their contributions. So having some of that positive reinforcement to help motivate individuals to continue to leverage their strengths, not just benefited her team, but also benefited the organization as a whole. And so in summary, Sheryl's leadership approach was really centered around these collective strengths of not just herself, but of her colleagues. And she valued the diversity of perspectives and the abilities of each team member and what they brought to the table. So really creating this collaborative and inclusive approach really helped contribute to her success as a leader and beyond. So we've looked a little bit at, the impacts of leveraging your strengths, understanding your weaknesses, but how can this actually benefit your career? And so I'd like to get your input here. We'll use the chat once again. How can leveraging strengths contribute to the success of your organization? And so I'll take a moment here and I'll let you type this in the chat. So how can leveraging your personal strengths actually contribute to the success of the organization you're working with, or even that of your team? And so if we were to go back a little bit, having an understanding that some of the key strengths that came up was around listening skills, empathy, coaching and mentoring, problem solving, people development, even building cross-functional relationships. How would those skill sets have an impact on the success of your organization or team? So Michelle says, enabling and helping them to become leaders themselves. So also increasing efficiency across the organization and supporting growth. So there we go. So being able to empower people to become leaders and then also have a more positive impact on the productivity and the efficiency of the organization and supporting growth along the way. Thank you, Michelle. I know we have a few other people that are just in the middle of typing here as well. And so as you're typing, I'll just bring up some of the things that came top of mind for myself was, by leveraging your strengths, it can create a more collaborative and effective team. And it can also improve individual productivity, innovation, and even the bottom line for the company. And so Tiffany says, those key strengths mentioned build a foundation of trust, which allow for development collaboration that will push all the company forward. Oh, that's a fantastic synopsis, Tiffany. And actually, I think you knew the answer to my next question here, because I was going to ask, how does it help build trust, loyalty, and engagement amongst your teams? And so when we're looking at these things and looking at leveraging your trust, leveraging your strengths, or understanding some of your strengths then allows you to leverage the strength of your team, recognizing that you can't be strong in everything. Better understanding where your teammates are strong can then make a more holistic team that is more productive and that actually collaborates more effectively. In addition to that, leading by example. You're recognizing that, hey, I don't know it all, right? By knowing your strengths and sharing what your strengths are, and also recognizing and showing where your weaknesses are, and allowing others to take on those types or that type of work, shares that, hey, it's okay. I'm allowed to be vulnerable about not knowing it all, and that's okay. Which then creates a safe space for others to feel the same way and feel like they can actually identify some of maybe their setbacks or some of their weaknesses, and help the team kind of come together from there. So those are some of the important, or some of the top level pieces that around how learning your strengths can actually benefit your career. But how can we start really assessing and furthermore actually investing in your strengths? And so let's take a look at how you can assess your personal strengths. So a few things that come up. One is, you can ask others for feedback. If you've been in a position or had the opportunity to go through a 360 feedback assessment, that's an opportunity to actually get feedback from people all across the organization. This can go even as easy as, asking people in your personal life. This doesn't have to be just work related. It's interesting how, if you find out some things about yourself in your personal life, how applicable they probably are within your workspace as well. Furthermore to that, taking assessments to identify skill gaps, whether that's looking at a, emotional intelligence assessment like DISC, looking at emotional intelligence from that perspective. DISC is a communication assessment, my apologies. And, taking these types of assessments can help you better understand where your strengths lie and also where there might be some growth edges. In addition, you can look at comparing to your weaknesses. So sometimes your strengths are actually the opposite of your weaknesses. So if you're someone who's not very detail oriented, well, you may be actually quite good at big picture thinking, or vice versa. So try and think about it in a way of, well, what are my strengths or what are my weaknesses? And what's the other edge of that coin? And how does that relate to how well I can effectively do those things? Self-reflection, I feel, is the one that is often missed. We're all working and living in a really busy time, and making time to self-reflect on your strengths can be challenging at times. And so that's why at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned, or I gave some space for people to kind of think a little bit about what are the strengths that I bring, and some ways or some things or prompts to help you do that can be, identifying, well, what do I do well? Looking at, what are my successes, and furthermore, what do I contribute to my team? And so asking yourself these questions can help you further identify some of the strengths that you bring individually and then to your team as well. Moving on, there's the adage question, do I invest in my strengths or do I invest in my weaknesses? And I'm going to take a quick poll here because I'd be curious to see what you think about this. So I'd like to hear from you. Which do you feel would have a bigger impact? Investing in your strengths or investing in your weaknesses? Which comes up for you? And so we got a little bit of a mix here. So I'd say most people feel that building on my weaknesses is the priority for them. And one other person mentioned, no, you know what? Honing my strengths can actually have a bigger impact. And so why don't we take a look at it and we can kind of dive in and decide what the best approach is here. And so we've already looked at, which will have the bigger impact, improving a weak skill or honing one of your strong skills. And to be honest, it was a bit of a trick question because the effectiveness of investing in your strengths versus your weaknesses really depends on a specific context or your goals. And so both approaches can actually be valuable, but they serve a different purpose. And so what we're going to look at is, well, what is the purpose that each of these serve? And that might help you better identify, depending on the situation, depending on your career goals, whether you should be investing further into the strengths you already have or looking to level up some of the weaknesses, or we'll call them growth edges that you might experience. So first things first, let's look at improving a weak skill. So investing in your weaknesses is essential, especially when it comes to specific skills or competencies that are required for your role. So thinking about your role in people and culture, I can imagine that it'd be very difficult or challenging if listening, empathy, thinking about how to adapt to others were not core skills that you're able to bring to the table, or that might actually have a negative impact on how you show up within your role or for the organization. So a leader, for example, who is excellent in decision making or innovating, however lacks the people skills, will never be considered a well-rounded or effective leader, is another example of that. And so there are a few ways in which we can invest in your weaknesses. We can look at skill development. So addressing weaknesses involves, acquiring new skills or improving existing ones. So this can expand your capabilities and make you more versatile in various situations. Improving a weak skill can actually reduce vulnerability. So maybe you're addressing a critical weakness that's hindering your performance, which can help reduce vulnerability and mitigate any potential risks moving forward. And finally, here, it provides a balanced skill set. So for your role in people and culture, it's important to have a balanced skill set that encompasses both your strengths and competencies in areas where you might be weaker. So while maintaining and improving strong skills is also important, strengthening weak skills often brings more immediate and transformative benefits. So it allows you to overcome limitations, reduce vulnerabilities, and broaden your skill set. All which will lead to more significant overall improvement and a greater impact in your success and effectiveness. So these are some of the reasons as to why you should be improving on some of the skills that you're maybe not as good at, some of your growth edges. But when is it a good time to actually develop your strengths instead? And so if, for example, we understand that improving a weakness is likely easier than honing a strength. Where if you're already at 80% in a strength, but you're at 20% on a weakness, probably easier to bring that 20% up higher than bringing that 80% up from a strength perspective. However, even modest improvements in your strengths can have a significant positive consequence on how you show up. And so how this might impact for you is it can provide you a competitive advantage. So it allows you to maximize your areas of natural talent or proficiencies. And by honing your strengths, you can become exceptional or really recognized in one specific area. In addition, it can help you increase your confidence. So building on your strengths can boost your confidence and self-esteem, which can impact your performance as a whole or even your well-being. And then finally here, greater job satisfaction. So when your work aligns with your strengths, you're likely to find your job more fulfilling and enjoyable. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. So investing in your strengths is often recommended for roles or tasks where your strengths are directly applicable and contribute significantly to your success. So it can really help lead to excellence in those areas. So I'd like you to take a moment even to think about, what are the areas within my role that I should be doubling down on my strengths because they contribute greatly to the success of my organization and how I support my team. And then furthermore, even thinking about, well, what are some of the weaknesses or gaps that I have that I'm not showing up in, or that I'm not supporting my team in the way that I should be. So wrapping things up here, ultimately the most effective approach is one that aligns with your personal and professional objectives. And so practicing a balanced approach can be most effective. Helps you leverage your strengths to be able to excel in core responsibilities in areas where you have a competitive advantage. Helps you address critical weaknesses that hinder your performance or ability to fulfill your role effectively. Or third here is you can actually be strategic in your skill development and invest in the skills that align with your career goals. So again, at the end of the day, this is really customized to you. It's really better understanding as to what are your goals, What are the demands of your role? Whether that's taking a step back and looking at your own job description or recreating your own job description, and then ensuring that the skill sets that you need to be able to fulfill that role in those jobs aligns with the skill sets you have, and being able to fulfill and be able to help support those that maybe are missing the mark a little bit. Any questions on this before I move on to the next section here, whether it's looking at investing your strengths or weaknesses? And feel free to come off mute if you'd prefer to ask a question directly or type it in the chat. No, it seems like we're all on the same page. All right, so the next section, what we're going to do is we actually have a short assessment. So we have the some of the top 10 leadership strengths. And what I would like you to do is take a moment to read through each of these strengths and then identify where you land on this scale. And so the first one we have here is looking at these different leadership strengths. The first 5 skill sets that we have here is vision, communication, empathy, decision-making, and resilience. So I'm going to pause here for 2 minutes and allow you to self-assess yourself. Based on these 5 skills, identify, what do you not do well? What do you do somewhat well? And what do you do well already? And so really looking to identify, more strategically as to, what are my strengths based on these 5, and what are maybe some areas for growth? And I encourage you to write each of these down. And the reason I'm asking you to write these down is because afterwards, we're going to do a little bit of exercise to be able to look at these skill sets and kind of decide, well, what do we want to do with them? Do you want to create an action plan around how you can develop them further? Is it something that, better understanding the impact it has on your role as much as on the organization as a whole? All right, so let's jump into the next section here. So we have our first 5 skills: vision, communication, empathy, decision-making, and resilience. Let's take a look at the next 5. So the next 5 here to complete our 10 include adaptability. So I have the adaptability to adjust to changing circumstances and remain flexible in my approach, especially in rapidly evolving environments. We have integrity. So I am honest, ethical, and lead by example, fostering trust within their teams or within my team. Innovation. I encourage creativity, innovation, and problem solving and decision making that drives my team forward. Looking at motivation, I inspire my team and help them find purpose and meaning in their work. And then finally, accountability. I take ownership of my actions and holding oneself and others responsible for their commitments. Okay, so everybody's done. We're going to go and take the next step, which will actually have a bit of a group discussion. And I'd like you to keep in mind these, the 10 skill sets and how you rated yourself. And then we'll actually talk a little bit about, okay, well, how do these skill sets apply to your role? How are you looking to build things up and everything else? And so jumping in the next session here, again, I encourage you to come off mute. If you feel more comfortable using the chat, by all means, you can use the chat as well. The first thing I'd like us to look at is, what were your top 3 strengths? So what were your top 3 strengths that came up for you?
It was kind of a tough one when I was going through all these strengths, just because I was like, okay, trying to self-reflect and go really, honestly say to yourself, how good are you at something? And I would say I tend to gravitate. I mean, it was difficult. I tend to gravitate to the empathy. I'm good with empathy. Really good with motivation. So that's another one. And then trying to pick the other one was a little bit difficult. But I would say that I'm really good with, I would say integrity is a big thing for me too. So if I had to pick 3, but like I said, it was a little bit tough to pick what I wanted to say, but yeah.
Okay. No, I appreciate you sharing, Michelle. And actually, if you don't mind, just because I have you already off mute here, when you're thinking about your role in HR and people and culture, how do you see empathy, motivation, and integrity kind of aligning with that role?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because right now we're a smaller organization, about 40 people. And we have now, implemented a new framework where we have different, and I think, Scott, I had mentioned to you this to you, but we have now management layers that we did not have before. So it was like everybody reported into one, the C-level people. Now we have managers that we've delegated down to. And where I feel like this is really helping is, now we're trying to help these individuals who are all strong consultants and they're strong managers of projects. But now we're saying, okay, now you're managing people. And it's all of those, what I would consider soft skills, right? That we just had a manager come to me and he's having a tough time with one of his direct reports. The guy is very just really direct in his communication style, kind of abrupt. And so, and this person that now is the manager is not like that, right? So he's really nice and, easygoing. He doesn't like conflict. And so we're trying to help him and coach him, try to help provide him with some coaching to help him through, and one of the things we talked to him about was, effective listening, right? So people say they can listen, but if you really see, you listen to conversations of people, you notice very quickly how people really, truly don't pause. And if they hear what someone's saying, they don't come back and say, oh, so what I heard you say was, just to affirm that you heard what they said, so it's just, so I feel like right now, the empathy, understanding what he's going through, right? Trying to say, I remember being a new manager. I remember, and the motivation, trying to encourage him saying, you can do this, right? You can learn to be a good manager. A manager skills is something you can learn. And so, and then, like I say, integrity, that's just in general, that's one thing I love about working for our company is that everybody's that way. They're very ethical. Everybody, thinks, respect is big here and just treating everybody equally. And so I would say that in my role, I'm finding that these strengths I'm using quite a bit lately. So.
Okay. No, that's fantastic, Michelle. I really appreciate you sharing from your experience.
No, thank you. Thanks, Scott.
That's great. And I'm curious, is anybody else willing to come off mute? Now that we know we can come off mute and actually converse, if anybody else would be willing to maybe share one of their 3 strengths and maybe how it aligns with their role, or even furthermore, looking at, how does that strength add value to your team? And again, feel free to use the chat here, Tiffany, Michelle Long. If that's your preferred method, by all means. If not, feel free to come off mute. We'd love to hear from you. I know we say we like to make these webinars interactive, and most people probably, or most webinars are not as interactive, but we feel like this is really the best way to get the most value out of these types of sessions. And so if you're willing to share a little bit, that'd be great. If not, if you feel like you want to go through this on your own time, that's okay too. But I encourage you to think about these questions, thinking a little bit about your strengths. How are they applying to your leadership role? I think Michelle had an amazing example of that as to, changes within their organization and how she was supporting a new leader by leveraging some of those strengths. Furthermore, looking at how are these strengths adding value to your team? And so I can imagine for Michelle, when she's thinking about empathy, motivation, and integrity, how these are adding value to her team is really kind of creating that supportive environment, letting them know that that you have their back and that you're there to help them through these types of challenges. Furthermore to that, I'd like you to think a little bit about, well, how are these strengths actually align with your career goals? So it's great to say that, hey, I'm really strong in these areas. Maybe they're currently adding value to my team, but my career goal is actually do something else, or it might be in a different direction. And kind of taking that step back to better understand, well, how does this strength align with those long-term career goals you have? And if they are aligned, then hey, that's great. You're in a fantastic position already. That'll help you move forward. But if they're not in line, then that's good news too, because it brings that awareness piece to be able to better understand how can you readjust. What are maybe some of the things that you wrote down that were maybe do okay or do somewhat well or do not do well on our assessment that you feel could actually help you move the bar forward for your future career growth. So I encourage you to think about these things as you go through your own personal self-assessment. The other piece here I'd like you to look at is, looking at creating a bit of an action plan, recognizing that, it's great to attend a webinar and gain new knowledge and have a better understanding. But our goal here is how can we bridge the gap between knowledge and action? So I'd really like to help support you in terms of finding something that you felt was a key takeaway for you today, and then looking at how can you apply it within your organization or just for yourself, for your own professional, personal growth. And so I encourage you to think about, what are some steps you can take in your daily leadership to maximize the use of your strength? And so when thinking about, empathy, this could be an easy one in terms of, well, when I hear somebody going through a challenge, I can empathize with what they're going through, or I can practice exercising that empathy strength or that empathy skill with them as an opportunity to get better at it and to continue to improve. I know we had a few others that were mentioned earlier on in the presentation as well. We were looking at listening skills. Listening skills, I'm sure there's enough opportunities in your day-to-day to practice those listening skills, right? Actively listening to somebody in a one-on-one, actively listening in a meeting, and I think Michelle mentioned it, but even being able to ask clarifying questions or repeat back what they heard. Oh, so what I'm hearing is XYZ. And so it gives you the opportunity to, or it shows other people that you're actually truly listening to what they say. So those are just some examples of some steps you can take on a daily basis to help maximize your strength. Otherwise, I'd like you to look at what actions can you take to build on your strengths. So think of what we just talked to. Steps is probably a little bit more in the practice realm, but thinking back to how you can develop your strengths, it could be looking for a mentor or somebody that'll help build those strengths for you. It could be looking at external resources, whether that's taking a course, a training program, hiring a coach, whatever that might look like. So looking at ways of helping you build upon your strengths, or even just reading a book on that topic. And so moving on to the next section here, looking at the obstacles that might come up. And no problem, Michelle. Thank you very much for your participation today. I appreciate you coming on. We only got another slide or two left here before we wrap up anyways. And so, for each strength, identifying, what are the obstacles that might come up in actually developing your strengths. So being aware of what those obstacles are, and then furthermore, looking at how you might be able to overcome them. And then finally, what support or resources can you access to elevate your strength-based leadership goals? And so what are the resources at your disposal you can leverage to help you continue to get stronger in those areas? And so I encourage you to take some time to kind of go through this action plan, even if it's on your own, to better identify how you can move forward and how you can build things up. So in terms of wrapping up for today, we've looked a little bit around strength-based leadership action plan. We've looked at investing in your strengths versus your weaknesses. We've identified, assessing your personal strengths and how you can do that, understanding your weaknesses, leveraging strengths to grow in your career, and then also impact of leveraging your strengths. And so I'm just going to take a moment here. Actually, I see Tiffany's jumped in the chat. So she mentioned that I believe that empathy adds so much value to my team because I can relate to them and show that I care while still driving company performance, but mainly showing that I truly care about each of my managers as people first. Tiffany, you're getting some props here. Michelle totally agrees. No, perfectly fine. That's all good. Thank you for sharing the chat. Yeah, I can imagine, especially in that people and culture role, how important it is to practice empathy, not just for the team members, but also to lead by example, to show them what does empathy look like so that they can then practice it with their team members. And what I've noticed is working with organizations that really do this well is, it starts from somewhere, whether it's within the executive team, whether it's the people and culture department, somebody's really practicing empathy well, and it's starting to have that ripple effect because people are seeing it more and more, and the managers can then practice it, and then it can have an impact on the individual contributors as well. So I think that's fantastic that, you're taking time to invest in that strength and sharing how it has an impact in your organization. So I do appreciate everyone their time today and sharing a little bit from their experience. I did have an offer I wanted to provide. It's an assessment I've put together, recognizing that, especially working in HR, at times it can be challenging to influence C-suite. At times, influence C-suite to get budget, influence them to be able to support different objectives or initiatives you're looking for. And so I've put together an HR assessment that identifies leadership gaps within your organization. And so it's actually using evidence-backed information. It's then leveraging and very helping you understand, how are the impacts of these leadership gaps impacting your company. And then finally, actually has a customized ROI calculator based on your organization. So the goal of this is really for you to be able to walk away with tangible information that you can have at your fingertips to be able to even just have for yourself or share with others, be able to share, hey, like this is what our communication is really costing us, but this is what the gaps of leadership within our teams is costing us. How important would it be to invest in these things? And so if you are interested in experiencing this, it's just 20 minutes together. We ask about 10 questions. We go through the assessment or the calculator together. And at the end, I actually send you all the information so you have a nice little report to be able to walk away from. And so if you'd like to take a moment and book in a time, I've shared a link to my calendar just in the chat at the bottom corner here. Feel free to book a time. More than happy to kind of go through this with you. And if it's an opportunity to be able to help support and share some resources and help support you in your role in people and culture, more than happy to do that. I'll just stop sharing for the moment and just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your morning to invest in yourself and, invest in your professional growth. Thank you very much for your participation today through the chat and for, letting us figure out our way through this new application. And although we tested the mic feature, I guess it didn't test it enough. So thank you for bearing with me on that one. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us, Michelle. Appreciate it, Melissa. Thank you very much, Tiffany. Looking forward to seeing you at the next one.